Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Coolbaugh. Today, I have me a very special guest, Brian Asher. Brian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Good to see everyone.
Yeah. It was excellent to have you on, my friend. I always like when I can get a hold of somebody, on social media and get them on the podcast and pick their writer brain, so to speak. So this is a perfect timing, actually, because I was getting really stuck on my one of my last scenes of my rough drafts. So I was like, I need a break. So it actually was a perfect timing tonight. So I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us, and we'll, get to talk about your books and learn something new. So
Sweet. Hopefully I can help with the writer's block.
that's fair. Well, we'll go right there with that first one. And what has your writing journey been like up until this point?
It's been very interesting because it started when I had my first child, my daughter. I had been writing a book off and on. I always wanted to write comic books. I always wanted to make comic books, but I couldn't draw to save my life. And I didn't have the money to afford an artist on my own.
Yeah.
So I was like, I think if I write my own novels and I just pay for illustrations for those, I could make something. And so I've been writing off and on. And then my wife said, we have a kid. If you don't finish this book now before she's older, you're never going to get it done. So the summer of 2020, I jammed out the last 175 or so pages of my rough draft, and then spent another month editing, and then I had my first book. And then luckily with the second book, once you finish your first one, it makes it a lot easier to understand, like when you achieve that goal and you've done the editing and you've gone through it and you're like, oh wow, it's totally doable. The second book I was able to get done in just a year, whereas the first one took probably 2 to 3. So that process is better, and my outlining process is more refined, and it keeps getting better and better every time I make a new book. And my second kiddo I just had in February, so that's delayed my book a little bit. I'm only about 70 pages into my third book, but I have a complete outline, and I know that once I'm able to jump back in, I'll be able to race right through the rough draft. So yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I definitely understand what you mean there. I was like, as soon as we're having a baby in January, so as soon as I found out, I was like, my buddy goes, "Are you going to keep that release date for January for the book?" And I was like, "Heck no!"
Yeah,
like we're bumping back.
No.
He's like, "You're mostly done. You're mostly done, and we're done in the fall." I was like, "Yeah, no." I was like, "We're still not going to do that." I was like.
Yeah.
It's like my wife was like, "Yeah, I appreciate if you move it." I was like, "Yeah, I figure you're having the baby, so the least I can do is move a book launch." So yeah, I definitely understand.
Fair trade.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's awesome. It's good to hear though, that you're one of several authors we've had on within the last few weeks, honestly, back to back that have said the same thing, in terms of between book 1 and book 2. It's been an easier process, and I'm going through that myself, where I'm trying to fix my first fantasy novel, and I kind of had to take a break because it's just not flowing.
Yeah,
but I felt happens. But I felt like I had a really good urban fantasy idea, and then I fixed it, and then I started to do some stuff, and it's been going well with prequel novels and stuff, and I still haven't been able to go back to my pet project. But it does get easier, right? Because you're like, oh, I already wrote a book. Like, even if it's not fully done, you're like, it's possible. So
yep.
I think it's always helpful that way. But yeah,
that's
cool. Well, speaking of your books, what genre are your intercontinents books in, and how did you decide on that as your genre?
So that's a good question, because it's a bit of a mixed bag. So
perfect.
I grew up, 90s, 80s kid, a lot of mixed universe stuff, right? X-Men cartoons, Spider-Man cartoons, Ninja Turtles. I had all the action figures. They all fought each other. They all, were in the same thing. So genre blending, or several genres running parallel, I didn't feel was an issue for me. So my first book is a fantasy adventure, and it takes place in the same universe as my second book, which is a sci-fi treasure hunt. So 2 very different stories,
cool.
but they take place in the same universe. And the way I've laid it out for myself is I have all of these little floating continents. That's where the intercontinents names come from, is there's just all these little floating land masses. And they do all know about each other. You know, they're all familiar. There's been, you know, warring in the past. Now there's sort of a peace at the moment. But I'm able to have all these little vertical slice adventures because when I was trying to figure out how I wanted to make my universe, I knew I wanted to have multiple books and I knew I wanted to have like a big playground. But what I didn't want to do, just looking at the shelf and also knowing where I was at in my author journey, being a newer author, I felt if I tried to do book one in a series or a, you know, 7-part saga or whatever, I'm really committing myself to convincing fans to have to go along for a ride with someone who's technically unproven. So for me, I felt if I can give you a complete adventure, beginning, middle, and end, you know, one book is one unit of entertainment, then I figure that you would have a better shot at being able to capture new fans because they know, well, if I like this, awesome. But they can also try different books. So you can read them in any order. So if you're like, I'm more of a sci-fi person, they pick up that one. If they're more of a fantasy person, they pick up the other one. And then my third book's actually going to be horror involving vampires. So
that's cool.
and then I also have, and my horror book will probably come out in like December or January. And then I'll have a comic book that's also like a complete side story that'll go like coincide with that. So I plan to like really keep building out the universe, and each little book is like one vertical slice of a different intercontinent to give you sort of like an overview, but it's not overwhelming. Like you don't have to watch 30 minutes of YouTube lore or read all these different things online. But if you do read all the books, then you pick up all these little Easter eggs that kind of tie all the places together, which has been really fun because it allows me to drop little hints in there that only I know until people read more of the books. And then they're like, oh, like you had that in there. I was like, yeah, I did. So every book drops a little hint for like what the next book will be, which has been really fun.
Oh, that's cool. I definitely understand what you mean by like a big playground. I'm a huge Forgotten Realms fan. Dragonlance. And I love what they did with the realms in particular, you know, where you had like the murdering Cormier, you know, you had murder mysteries, but in a fantasy setting. You had, you know, maybe some more of the steampunk, you know, you had, you know, I just felt like they did a lot, you know, with a lot. The Eberron books too, you know, did that, you know, as well. And it was interesting to see somebody like I actually interviewed Richard Lee Byers, which was super cool, you know, to pick his brain. He has such a great mix of fantasy, horror, and, you know, and mystery in there, you know, and he just does a great job of seamlessly pulling those three threads into a great story. So that's always really interested me. So when you're saying, you know, you have this, you know, huge sandbox to play with, I mean, I really do I like mystery and horror, particularly in a fantasy or sci-fi setting. I don't know if that was the aliens background for me or what, you know, but yeah, it's cool to do that way. I like the mix of, you know, those different genres within the fantasy or sci-fi realms. So that sounds really cool to me. It sounds like a good advertising campaign too, you know, for your world. Like, you know, you come in and, you know, here's a little bit. Because like you said, right, it's Brandon Sanderson can do whatever he wants, you know. Doesn't even show you what a book's gonna be. 5 books, you know, whatever. Doesn't even tell you.
I bought him blind.
That's fair. If I had the money at the time, I would have. I was tied up. I was like, oh, I like saved enough money to get, you know, different friends' Kickstarters. So of course theirs ran before. And so I was teasing one of my buddies. I was like, your product better be awesome. Because I was like, I just, you know, did not get Brandon Sanderson's. So I keep teasing him. Yeah, but I think you make a good point that, you know, we've talked about this the last couple of weeks with different episodes with different authors. And, you know, as a newer author, I do think you have to think about that, you know, like I tend to stick to trilogies right now, you know, instead of like bigger series. I have a couple of series I'm going to write as a trilogy, and then, you know, maybe like a second one if it's popular, you know, or if the sales are there. But yeah, it's hard, like you said, to just go new 1 through 7, you know. Not everybody's a Jim Butcher, you know, or even if they are, they just, you know, it's hard. I think Will White is, you know, one of those exceptions, you know, with Indy. After that 3rd book, I was hooked. I'm about to be at the 4th one pretty soon, but it's definitely can see what you mean there.
Forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think with the Dresden Files ones, with the way that they're on the shelf, they almost look like separate books. Like to
Yeah,
me, they
yeah.
don't look like they're, even though like over, it's almost like I remember my parents saying when the first Star Wars came out, there wasn't really any marketing around there being more
Mm,
until later. And then they talk about it being this big thing, which I know he always had those plans, but
yeah, yeah.
I think sometimes they'll even just have that book look as if it's a single story, and then
Yeah.
it'll uh, expand out, and then they can go back and put all those little subtitles on the bottom, like, you know, the
Yeah, yeah,
first of whatever. So
yeah.
but I'm glad you brought up Forgotten Realms. I do plan on reusing the characters from my books, and that's a big thing for me, is like having multiple adventures.
Oh yeah.
And it's funny, like I came to the fantasy party a little late, so uh, like I was obviously, like I said, big superhero comics, lots of indie comics, you know, Walking Dead. I got swept up in all that stuff,
Mhm.
and then I discovered two books kind of simultaneously: the Elric pulp books, and
Oh yeah.
then the I read the Dark Elf trilogy. So I read
Oh,
those pretty similarly, like around the same time.
oh
And
wow.
so like Malcose is actually sort of like my linguistic tribute to Melnibone, because they sound kind of similar.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So when I was reading the Dark Elf trilogy, I was just really impressed. Like, man, I really missed out on. It's very similar to like if you're reading multiple graphic novels of a certain
Yeah,
character that you may follow, right? Like, oh, I
yeah.
read all the Spider-Man or the X-Men or
Yep.
whatever. And so I was reading these books, and then I saw, like, you know, I go to the used bookstore, and I own all of them now because I was just grabbing them off the shelf, because who knows when you're going to see them or not.
Yeah, yeah.
And I just remember thinking, like, man, I wish I had been like to the party as they were coming out, because it's so fun to be a part of a fandom where you can like experience it as it grows, whereas I'm kind of going back. And then I also listen to a lot of interviews with R.A. Salvatore, and so
Mm.
you know, he'll talk about these, and I love those interviews. I'm such a sucker for him. You know,
Oh
he'll
yeah.
talk about different eras of like when he was writing this thing or that thing, and I haven't even read this stuff yet, but I'm just like fascinated with like
Mm.
the planning. Or like Jim Shooter, I love listening to his interviews where he talks about all the different little things he planned. So yeah, I was excited when you brought Forgotten Realms, because I think it's a good parallel to what I'm going to do with the fantasy side, although they
Mm.
won't be numbered, but I'll have these set characters, and they can keep having additional adventures, and then little plot lines can kind of, like, I do have a planned undercurrent in my fantasy world where there will be
Mm.
like a longer plot line that'll come to fruition later,
Mm.
but each book will still be a complete adventure. So
Oh, that's cool. It sounds very similar to like what I'm structuring for my own fantasy series, because I doing it like the Forgotten Realms structure, as I call it, where like I have like a character where I have 3 books, you know, and
mhm.
um like I'd like to do like 3 books, and then it's like kind of like their own adventure, but then another 3 with that same character where they're, you know, getting into that. I like the Avenger style thing. I want to do
Yeah.
that
Oh
with
yeah.
urban fantasy, you know, like I want to do my Monster Hunter mixed with my Valkyrie mixed with like the
Oh
other
yeah,
2,
yeah.
you know, and boom, you know, and I just think that would be, I just think it'd be super cool, you know, and I think I think having, my friend said that he's doing that with, you know, his like his fantasy series, which he's writing, which I think is really cool, because we're both huge Forgotten Realms nerds, and I just think it was so cool that you had so many great writers. Like I just read Blade Singer the other day, and I keep losing it on my shelf. I have them all sitting right next to me. Oh, it's right here actually. And this was a standalone, but it was in like the fighters. There was 4 of them, but it's
Mhm.
Keith Francis Strom, and I gotta say, I was like, oh, I just want like a quick fun read. And he so quickly, it's just crazy to think back at, like, and this is what I strive for, is like, you know, these guys and ladies were just like, you could do one standalone and
Mhm.
it'd be like the best book you ever read, you know. And
Yeah.
it's crazy to see what they do in, you know, 20 pages to get you to love a character so much that by the end you're like, you know, want to cheer or cry for them. I think it's kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
crazy. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I definitely get what you're saying. I like that type of structure. The Dragonlance too, it was cool to, you know, go with certain characters, but you know, sometimes they would go off on their own and have their own trilogy, and you know, sometimes they come back and yeah, do the main line. But I think that's great, you know, because you're, you know, if you can get people to enjoy those characters, I mean,
Mhm.
you know, it's like, oh, oh, who was I listening to? Totally blanking. Hickman and Weiss, like they were
Yeah.
talking about, you know, like how, you know, if you get those good characters, you know, and they were referencing Bob as well. where, they're like, if you can keep going like with the dark elf, like that's going to be a well that's there, and you can keep coming back to, which obviously, he does quite a bit, with the timeless and boundless and, those
Yeah.
new, those newer books. But yeah, I think that's a great strategy though. That's what I'm shooting for. So hopefully
Cool.
we're both right. We can just, I always tease people. I'm like, I want to take over the Forgotten Realms market, but that's awesome though. Like I always like hearing, people that are just getting to them, or, within the last couple of years. Cause I grew up, like middle school, I started reading them and they completely changed my life. Like between R.A. Salvatore, Elaine Cunningham, Paul S. Kemp. I mean, like those were people that made me want to write. And I had to write after that, after reading their books. And I just think it's always great to hear, I always love meeting somebody else that's read them. I stand on my pulpit all the time and I'm like, you guys got to read these, like at least read, The Dark Elf or The Crystal Shard or something like that. But that's super cool. Well, it's really exciting to hear though. I like hearing that other authors are, trying the same thing I am to, to do that same type of thing with their characters. To me, that just makes it more exciting. And, rather than just, oh, they're 3 and they're done and we never get back to this great world I built. It's like, no, I want to, spend some time and, peruse the sites and things like that in your world, so that's really exciting to hear. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, speaking of your world, so for that third question, so what are your 2 current books, The Assassin, and how do you say it again? Malkoze.
Yeah.
And then The Treasure of Lorev about, and how did you come up with these ideas?
So the first book was sort of a mix of a few things. I had a plot line in my head. I had started writing it. I actually started writing it because I was waiting. I went to my parents' house. I was going to pick up my mom. We always go to like shop the used bookstore together. So I was sitting and I was waiting for her to come home. And I remember just opening a Google Doc and I just typed a chapter for a character, a type of character that I would want to write a story about. And then I ended up loving the chapter so much and my mind just started like taking the story further and further. And so I just continued writing the story. As I got to a certain point, though, I realized the storyline I had just wasn't really compelling. So I ended up combining, and I know this happens a lot to other authors too, but I'm combining a few different pieces of other stories I had that made sense. And then all the pieces started to kind of click and come into place. But as far as the plot line for it, there's 4 different characters. 3 of them are protagonists, sort of iconic style of protagonists. You have a mercenary who is, been in the game a long time and he doesn't know if he can hang up his boots or not. And then you have a young boy who uncovers a new power that the kingdom hasn't seen in ages and the impact on his life that has. And then the king's daughter is toiling between sort of her path post-graduation. And so you have these 3 different pretty similar iconic styles of protagonists of fantasy, but the 3 of them are unwittingly united when an assassin he has a plot to kill the king, and so when that plot comes forth, it unwittingly unites them, and then it changes the kingdom forever. So I use that as sort of like a launching pad for what I'm going to be able to do in that world. And then with the second book, I decided instead of having so many characters, it's a little more contracted. So it's a science fiction treasure hunt, and there's 2 guys who basically are like my Nate and Sully, because I'm a big Uncharted fan. And so I was like, what if you took Uncharted and put it in like a cyberpunk type setting? Like, what if you mash those up? And so I was like, all right, cool. So then I have my Nate and Sully, and I was like, they look for technological artifacts. And so when they find a piece of one, they end up running into it's the granddaughter of this device's creator, and she's sort of like the Major from Ghost in the Shell. That's sort of like my homage to that character, because I love that series. Even like Standalone Complex, all the additional ones, I loved all those little series. So the 3 of them end up getting together, and so the 3 of them are on a hunt for all these different technological artifacts. They're trying to find all the pieces before the villain. And so the villain is an engineer that's remade himself cybernetically, and he has plans to enslave the people of Lorev digitally. And so there's like this big race against time element. So the cool thing too is each of the illustrations has them in front of a vehicle to kind of emphasize that like race against time element as well. So all of my books also have full illustrations. In fact, I can
that's really
pop
cool.
up some for you here real quick. So Yeah, so every character, all
Oh
the
yeah, I
main
love that guy.
yeah, all the main characters are illustrated. And then I also put additional pieces of scenery too, which was really,
Oh,
really
that's
fun.
cool.
Yeah, so I became like this is another character there.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and then I'll put like scenery as well.
Oh, that's cool. I like that.
It's,
That's very like old school,
I'm a
like
big
sci-fi.
I'm a big fan of the pulps as a template.
Yeah, yeah.
I haven't read enough of them to be like, oh, I'm pulp aficionado. I wish I was, and I'm still continuing to I picked up a lot of the Raven Chandler stuff, and I've got a big backlog, and so I'll churn through those. But I love their template, like the idea
Mm.
that you have quick, fast-paced fiction that's very visual, that gets right to the point, but has characters that you really become invested in. And when I thought about that template, I'm like, that template is more in line with our attention spans
Yeah.
than the current books on the shelves. I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
this is so bizarre to me. And then on this one, because it's a treasure hunt, every time they go to a
Oh,
new
that's cool.
location, so every time they go to a new location, there's a piece of scenery that's drawn by an artist, Cy Gardner. He actually works for Powerhouse Animation that does like the
Oh,
Castlevania
wow.
anime and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So he this was like one of his last gigs before he got that one, and he's way too busy for me now.
yeah.
But yeah, he's incredible. And so I have an incredible amount of illustrations. This one has, I think, gosh, almost 20 different illustrations,
Oh,
maybe, because
wow.
there's like 13 cities and 4 characters. So yeah, about 17 different illustrations. And then this one has, my first fantasy book has 6 illustrations. So I'm big on having a lot of visual entertainment for people as well.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's cool. I like the idea of like a cyberpunk like treasure hunt. Like,
Yeah.
as somebody that's searched for treasure, I think that just sounds awesome. So
yeah, my quick byline for that was Uncharted meets Blade Runner. So
oh, that's cool.
yeah.
Yeah, that's what I like. I don't know if you play like the Warhammer any of the games, but like they have like one called Blackstone Keep, and I highly recommend it. I'm more of a D&D fan and Pathfinder, but I got into Warhammer more and more because we were playing that game, and it literally it's very similar though. Like you go to these fortresses and you have to uncover certain tech, in order to do certain things. I don't want to give it away because it's really fun. But yeah, I highly recommend it. Yeah, it's really cool. But that's what now, I thought of like doing something like that because I like that. And I'm going to be taking my fantasy series and eventually going 2000 years into the future and writing my sci-fi that way. But it's going to be more of a sci-fi fantasy, like Star Wars sort of thing. Cause that's like my first love, and I can't get away from it. I've never gotten over Star Wars. Yeah, but that's cool though. Cause that's like exactly like my type of book, because that's exactly what like I want to write and read. So that's like really, really cool. So I'm really glad to hear you pitch it that way. So
Thanks.
That's really cool. Well, I wanted to just ask you real quick in terms of like illustrations. So, because I know some people have been, ask me about those in particular, and I'm like, I don't know, I never really thought about it. I was just curious at how you guys decided on, what the illustration was going to be, like what kind of that process was like.
It was really interesting, and I felt very fortunate in the people that I was able to work with. So when I finished my book, I knew that I wanted to have a cover that was very timeless and that was actually illustrated. So, I was a big fan of the cover for The Way of Kings when you look at the whole thing.
Yeah, it's nice.
So that was a big inspiration for me visually on what I wanted for my cover on The Assassin of Malcozet. Like if you notice, like anybody who ends up picking up the book, there's basically like a character looking off in the distance at this castle and this kingdom, and you can see a lot that's going on. So I knew I at least wanted an illustrated cover, and then I thought, I want to, obviously use the pulp template. I need, a couple like scenery pieces, and then I would like the 4 main characters to get illustrated. So I went online to ArtStation and I just started looking around to see who I liked. And I found this artist. His name was Emilis Januszkiewicz, and he's from Lithuania. And I emailed him. I emailed actually several people because I figured, well, I may not have an opportunity to get some of these artists, so I need to find like, multiple. He was the one I wanted the most, but I had emailed several. And he was actually the first to respond, which was really cool. And his prices were very competitive compared to some people that I had picked. Like one guy was a concept artist for like the Star Wars movies, and his art was really cool, but out of my price range for a meager new author. So, but Emilis did an incredible job, and he was such a sweetheart because he helped like teach me as far as the contract side. Like I actually have like a contracting template because of his professionalism. Like I knew about different things that I would need to do. Like I was like, okay, I want to make sure like I own all of this copyright for these images because I resell them at the Comic Cons and I use them for promotional material. And so I told him that's what I was looking for. And he's like, hey, I have this contract. And so like, you know, I use that. And he did both of my covers and all of my characters. But unfortunately, when he did my second book, he said he's not doing freelance art anymore. I don't know if that's changed, but all his stuff disappeared because I'd emailed him. I said, hey, I really, you know, my book's going to be finished at this date. This is when my rough drafts do. You know, I'd love to have you illustrate. And he's like, oh yeah, definitely. Just let me know when it's done. You know, I said June. He's like, okay, yeah, I'll be available in June. Let's do it in June. So then I went to go email him in June or like close to the end date, give him some advance notice. And everything was gone. His art station was gone. Like all his profiles online were gone. So I was scared. I'm like, oh my God, did something happen to him? Like, did he like, you know, who knows? So I emailed him like super nervous. And then he emailed me back and he's like, yeah, I'm not doing freelance art. I have, you know, something else going on. And so I was like, oh, okay. And he's like, well, but I will do this last book because I promised you I'd do it, which was cool. So I'm pretty sure I got like the last commissioned art from him, which was really, really, I haven't double checked that. So if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'm sure the internet will be able to tell me if I'm wrong or not.
Well,
but
still,
as far as I know, I have the last commissioned work for him.
Yeah. Well, still, even if you weren't the last one, you'd be the like last little bit, right? You know.
Yeah, I'm in the mix.
Yeah.
And so I wanted little chapter headers to go like to be a visual primer. And that's when I got Cy Gardner involved because I looked at his Instagram, and Instagram's another great way to find artists because you can really scroll through their portfolio. So I messaged people either email or Instagram, but I found him on Instagram. We connected. He was, you know, just incredible. He did such great work for me. He actually has a new promo piece I just got done that is, if you go to my website, you can either go ashernovels.com and you'll find all my stuff there. There's an intro video and the actual intro image that sort of shows this person like piloting a ship through the intercontinents. He did that image for me. So cool. Yeah, I've used him for other stuff going forward because his art is just really, really exciting. So if you're an author looking for an artist, don't feel too scared to just message them on Instagram or email them if you say that you're looking for a commission and you know you ask them their rates. A lot of people, you know, do. I didn't get responses from some, but you know they're very busy. But you'll generally be able to find someone if you want. And then the other thing is if you have an illustrator, you also need a cover designer because those are two different things.
Yeah.
And when the book first came out for the Assassin of Malcozé, I just like mocked it up myself because I have a pretty good background at just like rough design, like being able to line everything up and put some font and everything, and I got it done. But then as I saw the cover more and more, I was like, that's not good enough. So I had a cover designer redo the font. The books have a matte finish now, you know, and her name's Elizabeth Mackey, and she does exceptional exceptional work. She was really smart about where to put the lettering, how to use the negative space, which fonts to use. So if you end up needing like that 1-2 punch, I would highly recommend Elizabeth Mackey for the actual like font and design portion if you have a fully illustrated cover, because her like her eye for where everything should go is really, really good. In fact, the Treasure of Lorev, that cover, I entered into a cover contest and I was a finalist. And that's the only cover contest I've entered. Yeah. So they both do great work. So.
Oh, that's excellent. I definitely get what you're saying about like the like artists. Like I was like, oh, I want some things done for my website and, you know, images and things. And I like messaged so many people and I was able to find, I'll tell everybody, I was able to find Caleb Gosens. So if you go to my website and you like the, you know, 3 pieces he's done for me, he's absolutely amazing. He's way too cheap. I tried tipping him a couple of times and he was like, no. I'm like, the amount of rework he'll do too is like crazy. And now he's like really slammed, so I have to get a hold of him like 6 months in advance. So I know pretty soon he's gonna be out of my price range for those things. But it's nice to see, because when I first I tried to get him on here a few times. He's like, oh no, that's okay. And I had this other artist too. And I think that's what happened to the other artist that I really liked. All of his stuff is gone, and he was gonna do my book cover, and I'm like, Jeremy Adams, where are you? Like, I'm trying to find him into the void. So it's funny that you had a similar experience. So
yeah,
that's really cool. That's interesting. I know more and more people that are doing that, like Michael R. Fletcher. He has been doing that with Felix Ortiz now, where they've been, I know he's a big pulp guy though, like particularly, for like older sci-fi and cyberpunk and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I think if you grew up on those types of books or just like reading those types of books, I mean, it's like a lot of those things I feel like come back in style. Like you said, it's like, I don't know. I really like the, the Fritz Lieber, like Gray Mauser and Farhad, like just, I don't know. I'm looking at my shelf now. There's just so many books that give me the pulpy vibe, and it's funny how some of them are coming back. Like John Carter and Mars, I absolutely love those books, and I found a beautiful one actually, where like I haven't read it yet. It's like his son like takes over or whatever, and it's his adventures, but it's so pulpy. And when I opened it up on accident the other day, it had like the different swords and stuff at the top of the chapter. And I was going through, and then it had some different illustrations and stuff. And I was like, I got this thing for like 50 cents, at a used sale recently. And I mean, it's gorgeous. So it really made me rethink, illustrations and things like that. So yeah, that's super cool. They look great, by the way. They look fabulous. So
thank you.
You're gonna get me in trouble, Brian, because then I'm gonna need your book on one of my shelves, and I'm running out of room, and my wife's gonna get upset. So Kindle doesn't do justice for the illustrations and things. So
yeah, I have all my illustrations on there, and I didn't know this until I hired someone. So I had initially had the ebook for my first book, The Assassin of Alcazar. I did the ebook myself, and it took me forever to get it to work properly. It was such a headache, and it still gave me trouble. And then when I redid the cover, I also went back and removed a few typos and updated a couple things. I didn't like change anything dramatic between if you have an older copy and now, but just cleaned up some things, some formatting and stuff. And then I was so frustrated trying to get that new Word doc into an ebook that I ended up taking the ebook down. And then when I hired somebody, they're like, oh, basically what people do, everything is Times New Roman. And then unless you want to make each individual page an image, which is a grueling process and super expensive to do. If you hire someone, you could do it yourself, but it's horribly grueling. So the sad part with the ebook is that you lose all of the formatting. And like,
oh wow,
the first book, it's not as big of a deal, but on the second book, like for instance, I'll just pull up a chapter as an image. Like I put a lot of effort into the formatting. So like, I'll have very specific formatting on what it's telling you on like this city and where it is, and then the font itself. And I put a lot of effort into the visual experience when you open my books. That's very important to me. And the ebooks just put a blowtorch to that. And I see Times New Roman. And even if you look at like, because I was like, well, what does Brandon Sanderson do? He's the man. What's his stuff? Times New Roman. The Stormlight Archive and ebook is Times New Roman. Oh, broke my heart. So
wow.
So yeah,
I did not know that.
Yeah. So because I was at first when she told me that, I thought she was like, oh, she's just feeding me a line. And then I looked and I opened the Stormlight Archive, and sure enough, it was like Times New Roman with like just, one big capital letter. So I was like, yeah, if you do read my material, feel free on ebook. It is less expensive, but man, it's not the same. It's just not the same. And my paperbacks are only like $10. So it's not a big difference between the ebook and the paperback.
Well, it's crazy because there's this one author that I wanted to read so bad, and I try and try, but it's like I don't know what's up with I think it's like she just has such a big book. Well, I met her last winter, and I was like, just give me all your books. She goes, what? And I was like, I just want to finish this first book. It's a lot like the Witcher. I said, just drives me nuts because I'll get through like 8 pages of 8 pages or whatever, maybe it's 10 sometimes, on Kindle, and it's not even one page of her book. And I'm like, there's no way that's right. So I was like, that
Yeah.
number in the corner messes with me so much. So
Yeah.
I literally just bought like all 8 of her books. And she's looking at me and she's like, well, I'll give you a deal. I'm like, I don't care. I go, can you just sign them? She signed them, and I brought him back and I started to read. It was so much, more preferable. But I knew another guy who I don't want to say, but it was just funny because like his font is horrible on Kindle, like horrible. And
Yeah.
it's like so mushed together. And I've tried fixing it, where you can, change it or whatever as you read it, but it's like nothing I do changes his formatting. And it's supposed to be a great story. So he's one where I'm like, I'm just gonna have to buy the printed version. So I've
Yeah.
definitely seen that. And he's like, yeah, I've tried fixing it and this and that. And he was like, at this point, he was like, people either buy it or they don't, or they buy
That's why,
paperback.
that's why I
I'm
hired
like,
someone. I got so frustrated. I just hired someone. I talked to an author named Stacy Marie Brown, and I asked her like, "Hey, do you do your own ebook editing?" She's like, "Hell no. Here's somebody you should talk to." So I use that person now. Yeah.
it just sounds like such a headache. That's like I know at some point soon, like I probably already screwed myself over with my wisdom teeth. I haven't had an issue with them with years, but I'm sure at some point I will. Then they're gonna be like, oh, you should have came. Now they're like fused to your jaw or something. But I told the dentist last time, I was like, I will pay you extra. I don't even care, because my brother did it like live, where they just did the anesthetic. It took him 40 minutes to get one out. So he was telling me about the process. I was like, that just sounds awful. I was like, when I go, put me under, I'll pay you 8 grand, cut them out. I want to wake up, eat some ice cream, and feel fine. I kind of feel in that way about the formatting. Like, I'm like, I would much rather pay somebody to do it and not have to worry about it than to do that. Like, so
Yeah. Yeah.
it just seems like it more and more. And I've just talked to certain people. I'm just like, yeah, I'm like already set money aside for it, to be quite honest. So
Yeah.
so we talked about this a little bit. You did mention, we got this big sandbox world. Is there like a number, that you have? Like, are you like, because I know I'm like, oh, I'm gonna do like 15 in this fantasy world, and if it doesn't really take, I'll probably move on and maybe come back later or something like that. When the iron strikes a little hotter. And I kind of have those numbers in my head, for various titles and things. I got a Monster Hunter, or Roman fantasy, military fantasy mixed with vampires. I'm like 3, I'm thinking that kind of thing. So I was curious that, are you just like, oh, just really open right now if it blows up, or were you planning on like maybe 6 or something like that? Like, I just was curious at what your plans are so far in terms of this world.
I have, so with the characters that are in the fantasy side, I have 3 stories that are in my head right now. Obviously, the first one's out, and then I have 2 more stories with those characters. That's what I plan for them. As far as the rest of the universe, I haven't really put any specific like number. I plan to play in it as long as I possibly can, and new stories come to me constantly. And one thing I'll do too is I'll have different little side characters that will be involved in the books for maybe a short amount of time. They're very ancillary, but I'll intentionally leave them in certain places so I can do little stories with them too. So like in the Treasure of Laura Rev, there's a lackey guy who's only in it for a little bit, and then he kind of gets like wiped away. But I have a story for him in mind that I'm going to use either for a short story that I could use like in some of the pulp magazines that are coming out now. Like I know there's that Kursova magazine, I think, a few others. I can't remember all their names, but there are magazines now that are coming out. And so I have all these little short stories that I can pull from, or I can use them for the individual little like comic books, like, oh, these stories, I can make these little
that'd be cool.
Graphic novels. And then as far as outside of this world, I do have sort of another universe that's somewhat connected, that I've left the seeds there, but I'm not saying too much about it because it's still very early on. But I have a story that I'll be telling in another place that also somewhat explains the creation of the intercontinents and this other world.
That's cool.
Yeah, but I want to save that for a little bit later, just because it'll have so much depth to the universe itself that I feel I'd like to establish more of this universe before I jump into that. But yeah, I don't have any specific way to say like, oh, only a certain number of books. And another thing I do intentionally is I don't have any maps on any of my stuff. One, because there's maps and everything. But two, even though I'm such a sucker for maps. So it's like, yeah, but also I don't want to limit myself to where they can go. And if I make a
Yeah.
map, I can only be in that space, because
Yep.
otherwise, people could be like, oh, here's all these issues. And so I don't put a map so that it can feel limitless, and it can feel like there's all this room out there, and there's so many places you could be. Or if I create a new place, then I can say like, yeah, this place is here. It's always been there. Whereas if I have a map, then it kind of limits me. But I do have a rough
Yeah.
idea of like the total intercontinents. And anybody who reads my books, especially the first one, it talks a lot more about all the different intercontinents. So you'll get an idea sort of how they all line up.
Yeah, I was just curious, but I think you said, you plan on playing in the sandbox for a few. So
Oh
I,
yeah.
I definitely, not that you need to do, need to pull off a Terry Pratchett, but, but it is fun, right? To have,
Yeah.
all these things go on. That's cool though. Like having, plans for different short stories and magazines and, graphic novels and things like that. I mean,
Yeah. I
definitely,
really
that's
want to
like,
expand it. Mm-hmm.
yeah, that'd be really cool. I think that's just like one of the more fun things, I guess, to me is, being able to create something and to be able to, like, I mean, I think that's really what's so cool about, Brandon Sanderson, with the Cosmere is, like you have all these different stories and you don't realize they're connected until, later. And, you have all these people that, meet and cross and things like that. Maybe not
Mm-hmm.
crazy like, Malazan Book of the Fallen or something like that, but
Oh
there
yeah.
is still a connection with everything. So yeah, that's super cool. I think personally that adds a lot of depth to the world. I think that's why people like Star Wars so much and Lord of the
Oh
Rings,
yeah.
and you know, to build one of those things, I think would be really cool. So yeah, that's awesome. Well, so how did you go about your world building for your intercontinents? Like, what was that process like? Um, that just to me, that's just a cool idea. I'm a geography minor, so
Ah.
that just really that's just a really cool idea. So I was just curious how you came up with that.
So there's a few things. So I have a friend, his name's Kevin, and me and him had always wanted to do a comic book together. In fact, we had actually started making one in earnest.
Oh, cool.
But then, life kind of gets in the way, and
Yeah.
it takes a lot of time, a lot more time to
Yeah.
draw than to write. And he was
Yep.
the artist. He's really talented, but just sometimes life gets in the way. And we had talked about sort of like a similar world to the intercontinents, where you have like all these different little worlds, and they're all kind of in this egg atmosphere, and what they would be. And so to me, when I started making this story, I said I want to set it in a world that's an homage to our idea, because I
Oh,
always
that's
had so
cool.
much fun like creating with him, and we would just go for like a walk at like 2 a.m. and just talk about like all our creative ideas, or we'd be up all night sketching and having all these creative jam sessions. And I just had so much respect for his imagination and what we did, that I was like, I have to have some type of like piece of that within these stories. And so that the intercontinence is like an homage to that and our friendship.
Oh,
um
that's cool.
and he was actually my first friend in kindergarten, so it's
Oh,
kind of
wow.
crazy. Yeah. So it just, yeah, there's just so many little layers there. But that's where it came from. As far as world building beyond it, when it came to the fantasy side, I wanted to have something that felt a little fresh. So the magic system for them, and also would have room to grow. So the magic system in my fantasy world, it's all about elements and minerals. I'm a big Full Metal
Oh, that's
Alchemist
cool.
fan too, and so I
Yeah.
like the idea of like alchemy. Like they're playing with all these minerals, and they're playing with all these elements, and they make them have these like more explosive, exciting reactions than just what we see
Mm.
today, right? So just being able to have all these different little cool elements, and then everybody from that area and then a few other areas has like an aura that's like around them, that's almost like you can use it to like enhance a punch, or to like if you block it can be almost like a little bit of a shield around you. But it doesn't have any major properties, and it's almost like a muscle. Like the people who actually like are soldiers and stuff, like they are really really proficient with it, and normal people are like, I could use it, but I'm not that great at it. And so the young boy in that book, his aura ends up manifesting a new power, And so that will have huge ramifications down the line. So that's where like the world building comes from them. And then the interconnectivity between the places, I'll just drop little hints. Like, for instance, when the young boy's going to school, he's reading about Lorev and he's reading about their technology and what they
Oh, that's
have.
cool.
But Malcozé is rural and more of a medieval style, similar to like a good example is, for a lot of people know, is like the wizarding world of Harry Potter has a very different feel because all of their industry is around this magic. So they don't have all these different pieces of technology because they don't need it. Their whole world revolves around a different type of industry. And so to me, I'm like, okay, well, Malcozé can have a different style of industry and way of life because that's their way of life. They're more isolated. They want to be that way. Whereas Lorev, they're more open. They have more people coming in. They're very metropolitan. They're all about technology, but they don't like the magic. They find the magic like scary and perverse. And so I'm able to sort of interlay like these little moments where people will talk about these different places and also bring up how they feel about these places and how there's like more of that emotional impact that you would see just between our own world. You know, there's places in our world now that, you know, they don't even have telephone poles, right?
Yeah,
and some of those places, they don't even want them. They're happy the way they are. And so I think sometimes we take for granted, like in a fictional setting, like, oh, well, if this place is sci-fi, everybody would have it. It's like,
yeah.
you know, we don't. So like, why would that be any different for a fictional world? So those are my examples I kind of use to justify how these places are so different and yet still know about each other.
The history teacher me really likes that because that's really like cultural diffusion in a nutshell. And I feel like if my buddy and I talked about this a lot, where we, you know, I've had this idea, particularly with like Malazan Book of the Fallen, where I'm like, they have these amazing energies that they can use from different realms, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, it's crazy to think that only the Kitchen Chamal, like the lizard people, have this ability to, you know, like manifest machines. And I said, if we're discussing, we're like, well, would a society that has that magic system and that much power where you can create a nuclear weapon basically from the palm of your hand, like, would you actually create a nuclear weapon? Like, you probably wouldn't. So we really got into that magic versus, you know, like, I actually think it would, you know, magic would be a crutch personally, you know, when you like, if you could fly, why would you need an airplane? You know, and I just think at a certain point, you know, so I think that makes sense with geography. Like, that completely actually works with my argument with what I said to him. Was like, you know, like, I don't think you would use, I think you'd use tech or you would use magic. I don't think you would do a blend of the two personally, because why would you need to, you know? So I think that makes total sense. That's super cool.
Yeah, technology comes from necessity, right? So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, necessity and want. So
yeah, that's super cool. It's just good world building right there. So
I'll take it.
That's awesome. So what is one writing tool or strategy that you would like to try in your next book or series?
That is a very good question.
I've gotten so many good answers. Everybody said something different, and it's never one that I expect to hear. So like,
oh man, now the pressure's on. Gosh,
well, I think because we all think it's, you know, well, it's interesting. It's an interesting question, right? Because we each take it differently. Yeah. And that's where, like, the different answers I've got, like, somebody, I don't want to say, but like, I'll say after you answer, but it's like, I would not have thought of any of the, you know, like, I have different ones than you do, you know, and I just think it's important to point out, you know, is that, you know, something that, you know, you might find really helpful, I might be like, oh, okay, I haven't considered that to be a writing tool or strategy. So it's been one of the most helpful in terms of my writing process. So
yeah, I mean, I don't use a ton of like specific tools because the way my writing process is that, like, I'll get either a character or a story idea. Like, I'll, you know, like my second book, I'm like, I want to write a treasure hunt, you know, sci-fi treasure hunt, or I'll want to write like a specific character doing like a specific adventure. So my outline process has gotten more and more refined. I mean, one thing I would like to try that I see a lot of people do is they'll do kind of like the storyboard thing. Well, they'll have all these little notes of all these little like moments. But that's really how my outline process is. Like, I don't write, like, my page count tends to be like 250, 270, and I want to keep it that way. And the way I'm able to do that is each chapter is like a moment. So I'll just have like a moment. But being able to do that in more of a larger storyboard way would be cool. I did get to do that when I did my comic book script. I was able to like really like, I was taking the little square rectangle tool and like drawing out the panels on there and then like correlating that to the dialogue. So I would like to do more with the graphic novel format. Like my comic, I kept it small on purpose, but I would love to do, like, for instance, that comic's 32 pages. Like I would love to do something that's like a 6-issue size or a 5-issue size, you know, which is over 100 pages, and actually being able, because then you'd have to really sit back and go, okay, I have this many pages. Economically, how do I use all of these spaces to get the point across, but without wasting panels? Because that's a big thing that I learned when I did that first script, is I have the script written out just like in order of like the moments, but then visually, like as a director, taking it and making these little snippets of like, here's where I think this would convey the best image to like bring you there visually. To do that at a larger scale, like similar to how people, you know, the difference between writing like a pulp size fiction and like the, for lack of a better term, the phone book fantasy, where it's like this huge undertaking, like a store-bought archive. So if I could do that from when I get into the graphic novel format more, that's something I'm really excited about, because it would be a really big challenge.
I didn't consider that. I actually think that would just be good in terms of, because I always struggle with outlines. I think it's because it's just words. So I actually think I was originally going to be an illustrator. Not that I was that good, but that's what I wanted to do. I was pretty good at drawing, but I wanted, that's all I want to do is just to draw comics and then write my own and do my own drawings. I mean, so I think that would actually, maybe that's what's holding me back for outlining. So that's actually a really good answer. Somebody said like to, somebody said to do, go to like a writing like conference, like a retreat. And I'm like, did he consider that a tool or strategy? And I was like, that's a pretty good one. And then somebody else last week had said that they wanted to try different points of view, and, you know, particularly like a first person point of view in a particular type of story. And I was like, oh, that would be really cool. So I actually started doing my prequel novella from that point of view, just to see if, you know, I was like, just felt a little bit easier that way. I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a Dresden fan and it's that same point of view. But yeah, it's just, it's interesting though, like I said before you answered, it's interesting to see what different people come up with. I would not have thought of I've not considered one person's answer something that I would have said they would have picked, but storyboarding would be a really cool one.
Really bust out that rectangle tool on Word.
I think I'm actually going to do that, because I always think of it more, you know, like I'll look at art and I'll be like that's where I got the idea from my last couple of characters. I got another novella I'm almost done with, like a fantasy novella, and I saw this amazing art piece of this like rogue, like he just looked like, I don't know, he looked like he was like from the Middle East, but in a fantasy setting. And he's got this great black outfit and these piercing eyes, and he's like trying to, you would love it. I'll have to send it to you. It's amazing. Like he's trying to open up this artifact, and it has a magical effect that looks like, it looks like he's fantasy, but it's sci-fi. And it hit me, and I was like, oh, that's so cool. Like, you know, I was like, what would happen if you know, you had a sci-fi like technology that's ran by magic, so to speak, and then this, you know, little thief gets a hold of it and like trouble ensues. So I mean, it was really cool. But I'm thinking like, you know, that would help me, I think, because I do that anyway, you know. And there's times where I'm like, oh, like there was this one blonde, like very Viking looking warrior that this one female artist had done, and she did like 6 different ones, I think. And I mean, it's like a girl with this aqua, like this teal cloak, and she got this amazing like bronze like long sword, and I was just like, that's got to be a character in one of my books. And I took the 6 different images, you know, and came up with a really cool character for her, and she's just going to be awesome. Everybody's going to love her, I think. But you know, that really helped me. So I feel like storyboarding would be a lot more helpful than just doing an outline, you know, how I've been outlining with just words. So I'm going to steal that. Sorry, Brian.
Oh, you're good. Have you used Scrivener at all? I haven't, but I know some people like it for storyboarding. I've never touched it.
Okay. I do find it helpful. I have not found it helpful because I feel like I have to take time out of writing to teach myself how to use it. Um,
Oh,
like, so it's
yeah.
just easier just to write right now,
Yeah.
which I feel fortunate that that's the case. But
Mhm.
I bought it and I do really want to like expand on it because but I
Hmm.
need to like just have time to, right now it's just like my only time to write is my writing time. So to do that, my friend said that there are some seminars that he went to where, some of the bigger ones like Gen Con and stuff, I think was the last one he went to was last year, I think he said, and they like somebody was like teaching Scrivener tools. But I thinking I might
Oh,
actually
okay.
take a master class on that actually through Udemy. Um, or not Udemy, there was another one like that. So I think I might actually
Yeah.
do that. One of my friends also was like, he's really good at it. So I think him and I, in the next couple of months, when we have a vacation day together, might actually, he's just going to teach me how to do it. But I was just like, I mean, the things that you can do with it, that's why I bought it, is it seems like it's super helpful. But I tried watching a couple of videos and that's not how I learn. So I just need someone to like run through it with me. And I feel like it's going to be like a really helpful tool. Maybe that's what I need to do. I need to have him come on and we'll do a Scrivener YouTube episode. That way everybody knows how to do it. I'm gonna write
Yeah.
that down actually. Scrivener how to.
Yeah. I've never messed around with it. There's another interesting writing process that I'll throw at you. Ian Fleming, who wrote the James Bond books. Have you ever
Oh
heard what
yeah.
he did to finish all those?
Uh-uh.
So he would check himself in to a slightly crappy hotel in a place that he didn't want to stay in because it would force him, and he wouldn't leave until the book was done. So it would force him to get it done because he didn't want to be there anymore. So it was just uncomfortable enough that he would want to leave. And that was his
Yeah.
process.
Oh, that's interesting. That's
Yeah,
like
no
Will.
inspiration retreats for him. Just nasty beds and like no good food.
Oh, that's crazy. Well, that's the opposite of Will White was doing because he was doing like cheap cruises and he wouldn't know anybody. Like him and Ben Galley were, I don't think
Nice.
they were doing it together, but they both did that. And yeah, Ben, like when I had him on, he was like, yeah, I had to find like different places to go. Like he was going to, I know he lives up in Canada, past me a ways, but he was saying like he, would get like an Airbnb at like a cabin or something and,
Oh yeah, yeah.
do that. I was like, yeah, it's like, that does sound very interesting, but I like writing by the beach, like, or at a lake, like take me to a cabin by the lake and I'll get a lot done that week. But last time, it was 2 weeks ago, we did that. I did not get a lot done. We had way too much fun, hanging out and doing whatever, going everywhere. But yeah, well, that'd be cool. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to storyboard now. I think that's going to be a really good idea. I have a new whiteboard that I'm getting and I'm looking at the space now. It would actually be perfect to, do
Yeah.
the pictures or, print out with magnets. Did see somebody do that. So I think that's a really good idea. Well, we probably are cheating on this question, but what is one medium you would love to see your books turned into?
Obviously, I've talked about graphic novels left, right, and center. So that's a big one. Animated series, I'm a big fan of. I love all the I think there's just opportunities to be very true to the material because you're not having to pay for all the crazy special effects,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
would
yeah.
happen. So, seeing the Castlevania anime, how very well that was done,
Yeah.
that's an incredible one. And just seeing a lot of the animated series where people, put a lot of effort into it, that would be a big one for me.
That would be cool. Castlevania is awesome. I got through like season 2. I just realized like the newer season just came up, so I got to definitely get
Oh, gotta
caught
finish
up.
it. It
Yeah.
completes the story.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, that the Masters of the Universe, like the Revelations one, was drawn more in that Castlevania type of style. Now they have like the
Okay.
more kiddie ones, but that one was like I was actually surprised at how good it was. I was like, holy moly! Like the first 2 seasons of it, they like totally took the story and turned it around and made it very fresh, which I thought was
Oh,
very
cool.
impressive. But I didn't think I would ever want that until I saw Castlevania and then that like Masters of the Universe Revelations. I was like, oh, this is a really cool, And my friend was like, you would assume that you're an art guy and a graphic novel guy. He's like I almost had a graphic novel out, but the pandemic,
Yeah, yeah.
screwed that up. And I'm sorry, everybody. Maybe one of these days you'll get the story. I'm actually trying to find, speak of artists, trying to find a new artist. We talked about eventually doing on Kickstarter or something like that. But yeah, I think that'd be really cool. That's a good one. I hadn't considered that one, but I kind of want it all now.
Yeah.
Like, if Brandon gets that, we should all get to be on whatever medium.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Well, now I would really like to see yours as an anime. I think that would be like really, really cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can like already see it in my head, like playing out. So
Yeah.
that'd be awesome. Well, anybody in the audience, if you want to, get a hold of Brian and animate, his books, feel free to get a hold of Netflix, get that going for him. So we'll go with that last question of that eighth one. Do you have any current promos, news, updates, current projects, anything like that you'd like to share with us?
Sure. So the Assassin of Malkaze will be an audiobook soon.
That's cool.
My narrator is just finishing up some editing on that. And then eventually, my second one. But I do have an audiobook coming. And then my newest book should be out around Christmas time or early in 2023, along with a comic book as well. And then I'll be continuing to write in this universe. So even though there's only 2 books now, because I keep the page count shorter, there will continue to be material, and each one that you buy is a complete story. So you don't have to worry about, being left hanging. Every single one is a complete beginning, middle, and end. So.
Oh, that's cool. Well, definitely, I'll grab the books, but also make sure you tag me or send me the link or whatever for the comic book, because that just sounds cool. Those are my roots. So
yeah,
my friend the other day was like, "You're just a comic book guy deep down." I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "That's what I, first started reading, and that's what got me into, sci-fi and fantasy, were the comic books." So I was like, I try to stay, dear and true to them as best I can. I just want to remind our audience that you can find all of Brian's products and his websites and his socials in the description anywhere where you are watching or listening to this podcast. Just want to also remind our audience, please, 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 when it comes to Brian's books or anybody else that we've had on, please make sure you're reviewing those books, because if you're going to want, like myself, if you're going to want to read Brian's comic book or, or book 3 or whatever, particularly, in this world that he's created, that sounds awesome. Make sure you're reviewing books, because that's how you get more books. It's funny, Brian, because my friend Christopher G. Bredding, he's always like, "You're always so nice and sharing everything and helping me out." I'm like, "No, I'm selfish." He goes, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "I want a 3rd book." And like, he just came out with book 2, and book 1 was absolutely brilliant. I was like, I need a book 3. I was like, it's not, I like helping, but I was like, at the end of the day, I'm a selfish reader. I just want more books. So I just want to remind everybody to review. Well, Brian, it was a pleasure to have you on today.
Also,
oh yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, also, for anyone who does reviewing, I do have my 2 books on the Story Origin app. And I know that people can do review requests there. If I don't click on it right away, just bear with me, because I have to like log in and check it physically, but I do check that every week. And I have those available for like the ebook version, but I also have them available as a PDF. So if you want to actually review it in the original format that it would be in a paperback, I do have that option for people. So if you're on Story Origin and you do reviews there, you can do a request to review either of my books.
Well, that's good to know. I wrote that down. I have not heard of Story Origin yet, so that's actually
it's a good tool.
Really good tip. Yeah, that's really cool. I'm gonna check that out. Awesome. Well, Brian, if you have anything else, like I said, you can send it to me, and we'll put it in the description for you. If there's anything else that I can do at all, just feel free to message me. Some people get really afraid to tag people, tag me. It's just easier for me that way. I check social media a lot to to share and respond and things. But feel free to tag me, send anything by email, Facebook, whatever. That way I can help you, get your books and, hopefully your graphic novel out there, and, we'll do anything we can to help you out. So
sweet. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was great talking to you. Anytime you want to come back, you got the graphic novel or Audible, any audiobook or anything like that, releasing, just let me know, and we'll get you back on for a second episode, and we'll get you all taken care of.
Sweet. Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime, my friend. We have a good rest of the night, and I will talk to you soon.
All right. See you later.
See you later.